This book club is co-organized by me, Letitia Henville, the Editors Canada co-chair, and my colleague, Dr. Bailey Harrington, the Editorial Freelancers Association co-chair. We're running this event as a part of the Joint Association Editorial Freelancers Association, Editors Canada Academic Editing Chapter. And if you'd like to volunteer to help us with our work, please visit the EFA's Academic Editing Chapter website, which I have just popped into the chat now. For those of you who are new to the book club, welcome. We are very happy to have you here. Today, our host is Kia Thompson, a freelance editor who specializes in coaching academic writing. She lives in Minneapolis. Kia, I hand the virtual microphone over to you.
Thank you, Letitia. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is a pleasure to be here with you today to discuss Karen Yin's The Conscious Style Guide, a flexible approach to language that includes, respects, and empowers. Karen is on the Chicago Manual of Style Advisory Board, but you may know her from her irreverent AP versus Chicago blog, comparing AP style with Chicago style. Her Conscious Style Guide website, which was launched in 2015, was named by Poynter as a top tool for journalists. She also founded the Editors of Color database, one of Writer Digest's top 101 websites for writers. And finally, after decades as an editor, Karen became the author of 4 children's books, including Nice to Eat You, coming in 2026 from Scholastic. The Conscious Style Guide is her latest book. Karen, thank you for being here with us. I do have a few questions to get us started with our Q&A, and then I will open up the floor to questions from the room.
So I just want to say hi. I'm so happy to be here. This actually has been planned for a long time. So yay. I am ready. Bring on the questions.
All right, sounds good. Karen, I think that you do an excellent job of predicting the questions or the concerns a person may have while reading about conscious language. For instance, you address introspection, embracing your missteps, encouraging incremental changes. You suggest helpful therapy practices. Can you speak to the importance of these components in conscious language?
Absolutely. One thing that I noticed with all these guides for inclusive terminology was how it was very external, like it presented language as this external thing that you adopt. And what was missing was how that connected to your beliefs and your feelings and your abilities and your resources. So this book, I wrote it as a book of tools, and I structured it like a journey that someone new to conscious and inclusive language would take. So I thought really hard about what do I need as somebody who is using or trying to use conscious language. And I call it a practice throughout the book for a reason, because I want people to know that it is a practice. It is something that I'm still practicing. There's no one way. So how do you begin this practice of using language? I thought about like when someone teaches you how to ride a bike, they also tell you how to put the chain back on if it falls off, how to pump your tire back up if it deflates. And I thought that it would be really negligent of me if I did not tell you how to repair the barriers inside yourself so that you can continue to ride the bike that is conscious language. If you ride a bike and you fall and you say, well, this is not for me. In this book, I want to tell you how to get back up, how to apologize, how to forgive others, how to forgive yourself. To me, all of that emotional, internal stuff is crucial when it comes to using language, period. language is about feelings. Because if I were to give you a word outside of, like, without any context, it has no meaning. Like if I were to be in China and I said woman, that sounds really a lot like woman, which means we or us, right? So the context is what gives content meaning. So to help you with the context of language, you have to think about the context of I don't want to say vehicle, but let's say the vehicle that is using this, where your heart is at, your mind, all of that. So that it's a tool.
Yeah. And I love that metaphor, the bike of to get back on that bike of conscious language. You have these tools of introspection, therapy techniques, embracing your missteps. Like embracing your missteps is a tool. You can assess from there and recalibrate based on that. So I love that. That's great. With that said, I am wondering, how do you suggest an editor negotiate conscious language with a client when the circumstances may not be ideal for conscious language, like admissions process?
What do you mean by admissions process?
Or I'm like an academic admissions process.
Like when someone applies to go to university? And are you asking about the form that people use?
Yes, like about just if you're perhaps the prompts, you're responding to the prompts and you want to be using, and it doesn't need to be specific to an admissions process, but just in general, it could be a marketing, something going on with marketing, and you may see something where it's like, I think that we should be mindful of the language that we're using here, but for whatever reasons,
Okay.
you might not be able to
Okay,
really
thank you.
leverage it.
I was trying to because every time I'm asked the question, I think of 1,000 things. So that really
Sure.
helped me put down. I would say that if there's something that you want to bring to their attention, phrase it in a way that appeals to their goals. So for admissions, for example, they may want to make sure that they're using language that addresses a broader audience and they're not unintentionally narrowing it down to a specific group, or they're not using words that are associated with appealing to a certain group, even though it is, gender neutral, race neutral, etc. So if you were trying to talk to a corporation about their marketing materials, what do they care about? Do they care about the bottom line? Um, you could say, oh, I noticed that this competitor is using this language to present their materials. I really like it. I think, do you want to try that also? So you can make it as something that is positive for them. What I would hesitate to do is making it like a fear thing, like saying, oh, if you don't do this, people are going to criticize you. Instead, frame it positively, um, like I often say, as a queer person or as a person of color, this really speaks to me. Like I see how this opens up channels. Like, would you like to also use this language? So I would phrase it like that. And as an editor, if I present it once and they say no, whether I present it a second time really depends on how strongly I feel about it. If I think that they may be misconstrued, then that will be the second thing that I bring up. So first I bring up the joy, and then I say, well, it's possible that people are not going to comprehend this, and they're going to think that you mean this, whereas your intention is this, but the impact is this. So would you like to use this language, which is more understood in your industry, in your field? And here are all the other organizations or publications that have adopted this language? Like, would you like to also use this language? So, in my query, I will say, I will say something like, I noticed that you use this language, and then other people are using this language according to, and I will cite some source that they admire, whether it's a style guide or a dictionary or another organization. I would say, according to this, this is how they phrased it. So I would present it like that. And some editors will say, well, what if they just won't do it? You've done your job. If you bring it up once and twice, you've done your job and move on. I always tell people I'm not in the business of conversion. I'm not trying to make people change their minds, but I'm trying to help people who want to use conscious language how to do it well. That is my goal. Um, and my reasoning is all the energy that you put into trying to change someone's mind. Imagine what else you could do with that energy. If you talk to people who want to do this and you help them do it better, that is a much more efficient use of your energy and your time and possibly your money.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, I was going to say that shaming rarely works. I love what you're saying about like framing things positively, because yeah, shaming rarely works. People do, like, if you approach someone with positive framing, then they're more than likely going to be less hostile or not hostile at all in their response. So I totally hear you on that. And I agree with what you're saying. And with that said, I'd like to ask you, you talk about in your book conscious language as being a form of equity. And I'm wondering in particular, is conscious language having the intended impact? And how do you know that?
Right, because the way I frame conscious language, I talk about the 5 components, and consequence is one of the 5 components. So it's all about impact. In fact, so the impact of conscious language and language in general can be felt in every interaction. For example, I've noticed that a lot of people, they have stopped commenting on my appearance. Like even my mom, she no longer says, oh, you lost weight, or oh, you gained weight. Even my mom is using conscious language. The impact on me immediately is, oh, I'm going to see my mom more. Or like I'm going to see her and I don't have that. I don't have to brace myself for that feeling of dread. Um, that also means that when I leave my mom's place, I have a much better mental health. It allows me to perform my work for that I need to get paid for. If I'm in a bad state, it might be really hard for me to function, and I won't be able to complete my projects, or I will miss deadlines. So what I'm saying is conscious language and non-conscious language has a ripple effect. And it is not just isolated to like this interaction, like our interaction. I've noticed that you did not say something like, "Oh, Karen, your English is so good. Where'd you learn that from?" Right? So I also notice what people don't say. And if you had said that, maybe I would think twice if you contact me to collaborate on something. I might think, oh, do I want to be in the company of somebody who says things like that? So like the effects are tremendous. It goes from mental health. Mental health can become illness after it accumulates, right? This is what people say about microaggressions. Illness might become I don't want to become really negative about this, but also if you start to not be able to think clearly and not be able to function, that affects your interactions. People might not want to hang out with you because they think, oh, they're always depressed, they're always anxious. So like the effects are just so tremendous. And I'm not even getting to the part where if you use non-conscious language deliberately to attack a group, that has severe consequences leading to genocide. So, so I would say yes, conscious language absolutely has an impact, and it is profound.
Yeah. And I like that example that you use with your mother. And because she doesn't say things like, oh, you've lost weight now, you are more apt to go over there and hang out. You're absolutely right. I can attest to similar situations where I've noticed, like, oh, they're not using that language that I'm predicting, that I'm used to them using. And so, and also too, I just want to reiterate, because I like how you're talking about impact. And I think something that you do so well in the book is talk about how someone, the intention, right? Oh, my intention wasn't to hurt your feelings. Well, but they did. And I think that you do a good job just talking about, like, look, someone may not have bad intentions, but nonetheless, the impact could be horrific on someone. So,
Mhm,
yes.
mhm.
And I do have a couple of more questions here, and we're doing pretty good for time. And I'll probably be opening, taking questions from the chat here shortly in about 10 or 15 minutes. So if anyone has any questions for the chat, I know there's a few in there. If you want to get them in there now, I will be opening the floor here in about 15 minutes. So moving on, I want to ask, so this question is more about me catching the spirit of the time. And so I'm just wondering in general, as editors, how should we think about conscious language in the context of AI? Are there efforts to leverage conscious language via AI?
Okay, yeah, okay, so when people say AI, they often mean generative AI because AI has been woven into almost everything we've been using for a long time. Like I remember, um, but yeah, at least 5 years ago, I was telling somebody about how long it took me to curate the articles that I put in the conscious language newsletter. And he was like, oh, I could just very easily write you a bot and we could use AI to find articles for you. Right. So AI has been around for a long time and it's been invisible because we haven't really thought about it. But now that this thing called generative AI is completely like taken over like our conversations, our work, like people are starting to conflate AI with Gen AI. So I want to make it clear that I'm going to separate those two. So I'm not keen on generative AI, but I am not opposed to using it for saying like, oh, I'm going to have a Q&A about conscious language today. What questions might people ask? So I like using it to like generate questions like, oh, okay, that's pretty helpful. I do not like using it for, oh, please write the next 10 tweets for me about something. I'm not into it for that purpose. So for editing, I see that a lot of people are using AI, generative AI or both actually, in interesting ways. And I don't want to shut myself off from the possibilities. And a lot of people would say, I mean, the biggest problem that generative AI has right now is that it's bad. If you, I've been testing Perplexity AI and I'll ask it questions and it will very firmly say, here is the summary of whatever you just asked about. And here are the sources that I have, gleaned, right? Because it always provides you like links to articles. So I always go to the articles and I always see flaws in their summary always. They will bring up articles that have nothing to do with what I asked about. So I think that just because a tool is bad right now doesn't mean that it cannot be trained, it cannot become better. So I have hopes that AI, both generative AI and the old, bot AI, will have the ability to be used for conscious language. And for that, I don't mean it will scan something and seek out words. What I mean is it will have some kind of intelligence to look at 500 words, a book, a series of books, and say what the context is, so that in the future we could say what types of um, let's say, what is the racial diversity of the people who have been featured in this magazine series? And it will be able to say, oh, it features mostly white people, straight people, and then we will be able to see where the gaps are for conscious language, because conscious language is not just some word that is inoffensive. In fact, I talk about why it's not about being inoffensive and why conscious language sometimes requires offending. So conscious language is also like backing out of the word, zooming out, and going to the sentence level, the story level, and the series level to look at what is happening in this world, what is happening around this word that makes it okay or not okay for your use for this audience, and depending on who you are, like who are you to use this word? How will it be received? You need to look at all of the context, and AI might be able to do that for us really quickly. But right now, it's bad. Just recognize how bad it is, and how often, as editors, we need to fact check it. We need to shore it up. We need to what it is, remember how people would say, don't ever quote Wikipedia?
Yeah.
I mean, so with that same awareness, don't ever like rely on this one thing that you get from generative AI. Uh, Look for other clues, do your own research. That may be a starting point. They might, sometimes I use Perplexity AI like Google, because I will use DuckDuckGo, I will use Google, I use Perplexity AI to see who gives me the most, the best answer. The answer is none of them. They all have their specialties, but all three of them combined will give me the clues. It will give me the keywords so that I can do more research. So, does that answer your question?
It does. And I'm actually thinking about, because you're right, like it, for one, I'm hearing like take an offensive versus defensive approach. It can be very helpful. And in terms of how we leverage it, well, right now it's really crappy. So by using it, we can actually start filling in the gaps, hope, right? Like ideally in making it what we want it, what we would like it to be, how we want to be able to use it, I guess.
Yeah, and then even like as you're saying that, I have the sinking feeling, just because like the issue with generative AI is so extensive, is so massive and so pervasive. Like we haven't even talked about the ecological impact, the environmental impact of using even Google. Like we haven't even discussed all that, which is the deeper consequence of investing and participating in something like this. So these are all questions that are really hard to answer and hard to talk about.
Right.
But like even like driving my car, I think, do I really need to use gas today? So like everything that we do, there is a short-term consequence, there's a midterm, and there's a long-term consequence, that are just so like multi-pronged and multi-dimensional, that would be good for us to be aware of. And sometimes people are like, there are some people who are really, really against, let's say, anti-racist language, which is not a bad goal. Like you're just like, but if the choice is between that and using potentially racist language, and using language that has a deeper consequence of another kind. Let's say it's extremely anti-sexist, but a little bit racist. Like, what do you choose? So it's kind of like the lesser evil. So sometimes we are forced to choose something that is racially inappropriate, but is beneficial on another level. And like, I often bring up like the words BIPOC or a person of color, and like, who likes those words? I don't know if anybody likes those words. And I feel like every time we use those, we do a little bit of harm, right?
Mhm.
But those might be the best ones right now. So we kind of have to weigh those things. Is it about never doing harm? No, it might be choosing the lesser harm.
Well, and I think what I hear you saying is just the complexity of our issues. The the solutions are going to be just as complex.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that so the five components, one of them is complexity. It's about preserving the complexity. And anytime you have a very binary attitude or response or word, it's time to pause and think, am I respecting this situation? So that's why I'm not against banning words,
Yeah.
unless it's in a very, very clear context, right? Like for picture books, I would say if you want to ban the F word, okay, all right. But I would not ban or avoid words just because in certain contexts they are bad.
Sure. Yeah. And I just to you kind of touched on it, but yeah, in the book you talk about your own name in context, like there these
That's
yeah.
so funny. Like, so I actually kind of resent my parents for calling me Karen. But like as a child, I resented them because it sounds nothing like my Mandarin name. My Mandarin name is Jialing. And how do you get Karen from Jialing? I just don't understand. Um, so even as a child, I was like, Karen is such a boring name. Like it just reminds me of like a brown-haired girl. Um, and now it's a blonde-haired woman, and now nobody likes my name. So we're all even. But yeah, so I like using my name as an example of many things. One is even though a word is associated with something negative, it doesn't mean that you just avoid it. Like, what are you going to do? Like, start calling me Mixian, like, and just avoid saying Karen entirely?
Yeah,
No,
no.
that in itself is offensive. There are
Yeah.
many people
Yeah.
with names or surnames that remind us of something else. Like, it might literally sound like a funny word or maybe
Right.
even a sexual word, or are you going to just tell them that their name is offensive? So we need to get over the idea that things that sound like something else or things that are spelled like something else that is widely considered offensive, that is also offensive. Like, we need to use words contextually. So, like with with the word Karen, the reason why I support the use of Karen when you're criticizing, usually a woman, but not often, not anymore. Usually a white woman, but sometimes not. Uh, for like calling the cops on Black people just swimming in a
For no
pool,
reason. Yeah.
or
Bird
like
watching.
to mow their lawn, or something very typical that the like other people have are the complete right to do without being questioned or hounded. I
Mhm.
completely support the archetype Karen to criticize that type of racism or blatant discrimination.
Mhm.
Um, However, when people call anybody Karen just because they're complaining, come on,
Right. Yeah.
doesn't make sense at all. So it has morphed to that a degree where, like, on Reddit, I'm also always seeing posts that say, oh, I spoke to this Karen, and I read it and it's like, oh, she just asked you to do something. And that's not, how is
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's
being, how's that unequitable, right? So I'm sorry, inequitable. So yes, my name is a great example for me to use, of many things. Complexity. that's another, oh, I already mentioned it. So so let me just go over the 5 components. So
Yeah, please.
it's skillful selection of content. It is awareness of context. It is consideration of consequence. And I may need to look at my cheat sheet here. It's a preservation of complexity, and probably the most important is emphasis on compassion. So the emphasis on compassion is what makes conscious language different from any other mindful language. Like you could be mindful, but if you keep compassion in mind, compassion for people who have been historically marginalized, then that is when you kick over to conscious language.
Love that. And that leads me into my final question. How do we minimize exploitation of conscious language? For instance, a billion-dollar corporation's incentive for conscious language use and an individual's incentive for its use are probably different. How can we stay vigilant so that conscious language stays in the hands of those it was meant to lift?
I love this question because it helps me drive home a point about impact, about consequence, which is, let's say you have really bad intentions, and let's say you just want all the money, and you want to use certain terminology because you're like, oh, I'm going to show off that I'm trendy, I'm in the know, I'm going to fool people into thinking that I'm with it, and then I am into DEI. So you're saying that kind of bad intent from corporations. My concern is the impact. The impact, what is the impact on me, on us, on all of us, um, our mental health, if we feel like we belong? um, how do you change the perceptions of a marginalized group? Do you raise their visibility? Do you like what is the impact that way? And I, what often happens is, because they are so focused on the bottom line, they will say, oh, okay, so we've been doing this campaign for 6 months, and we have, look at the sales. What are the numbers telling us? Look how these communities are not now talking about us on social media. Look about how like they're sharing pictures, or so they're going to look at that impact because that's what they're concerned about, and they will see something change. Of course, there are appropriate and inappropriate ways of targeting a group. And that is up to them to kind of explore, just the way that we explore. Like when I'm talking to you, I may say something wrong, and I might see something change in your face because I said something a little bit off. Then I will modulate. And so I don't blame a corporation for failing. We fail.
Sure.
They have probably a lot more money to hire experts and focus groups and all that to ensure that their message is more on the money. How appropriate. Just like politicians, right? We have higher standards for politicians and celebrities, like because they have the platforms, they have this influence, they have all this power, we expect more from them.
Mhm.
But so when they fail, when they say something that has that lands wrong with a wide group, this
Yeah.
is what I do. I look at their pattern. Is this common for them? Have they always missed the mark? In that case, I don't mind if you call them out. But if they have a really solid pattern of supporting marginalized communities, and they happen to, maybe their social media person said something a little bit funny or deeply offensive, I take that into account, their whole history. And I don't want to call them out because they have proven themselves to be an ally, and they are trying, they have tried, and they have done so much. This is how I think. So I I'm okay giving them that grace. I'm also
Sure.
good pointing it out. I'm good pointing it out like, hey, Like, I'm going to let them know, so I noticed that you did this. What if you did this instead? Like, for me, that would really speak to me. I think that would be a much better way. Like, I have contacted people to let them know. Yeah, so I don't think that celebrities who have a really strong track record of being allies and being uh, or even being members of the community themselves. I don't think that we should like be like, oh, post on social media and say, oh, you said this wrong, I'm going to stop buying your records. Um, what if they didn't know? What if it's an honest mistake? So it's
Right.
all about context. What is their context?
Yeah, and for me, I mean, I'm just listening to you talking. It all goes back to it's between intention and impact. Because what you're saying though, like with the corporation, that maybe they had a bad misstep and the impact was really bad, but you might look back on their track record and see their past intentions and impact from their past intentions, which could be very positive. So therefore, yeah, giving some grace.
I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, I think it really depends on who says it, how they say it,
yeah,
how the timing is. I like to look at all those
context.
things.
Yeah.
And the ultimate reason why I have chosen this approach for myself is because I don't want to criticize allies and have all that influence just say, you're not worth it. We can't, oh, we keep making mistakes, I guess. Nothing we do is good enough.
Sure. And yeah, and this goes back to what you're saying though about compassion, context and compassion. These are both important components. And there was one final thought that came to my mind, and now it's escaping me. But yeah, oh, and just yes, like to answer my own question as in terms of equity, how do we uplift the people that this was meant to lift, when a corporation does get it right and that impact is positive and more inclusive of others, then that's felt by all of us. Like there is some trickle down effect, it seems like, where you just feel less, I guess, othered in just general, just walking into a space because, in a commercial sense, you do see some change in terms of inclusivity. And with that said, I am going to go to some questions from the chat. All right. And to start off, we have a question from Leslie. I'm seeing terms like multilingual authors and English as an additional language replacing ESL. Yet, I think most people in the world speak multiple languages. And where I live, many people are bilingual. They grew up speaking English and Spanish fluently. So, isn't English as a secondary language more accurate? Not a second language, but secondary. I'm looking for a term to describe people. I'm looking for a term to describe people who are not fluent in English. And there is an ongoing conversation. I guess it's unclear to me what the question.
Okay, so I mean, I could kind of speak to it a little bit. So, how you describe them, I think it matters a lot to the field or industry that you're in, because some teachers feel really strongly about saying ESL and they would say multilingual. Like, this really puts forward the accurate concept that these children are multilingual. As to English as a secondary language, um, I would Google that and see if it's being used, how it's being used. Sometimes when I Google a term that's new to me, I will see that it's been adopted already, like it's been in use for decades, and like it's new to me, but not new to them. And there may even be some conversations um, about the use of this term. Like sometimes I'm so late to a term that they've already discarded it. So the but I talk about in the book deferring to the community that's directly affected by the language. So I would, if possible, ask people that you're talking about, like, how do you feel? Would you describe yourself this way? And they might say, oh, all these 5 terms of ways of describing me sound good. I'm good. I'm good with all of them. Some instructors who are not in that community might have another take on it. And I think that this clue is also valuable. Like I would not disregard them just because they're outside of the group, because they work intimately with the group that is affected. So I would also pay attention to their recommendations. And then another thing that I would consider is even if this group they were totally fine with ESL the way that has been used, if I used it, would other people in this industry or field think that I was using a really outdated term, and therefore what I'm about to say will not will not land the way I want. So I will consider all these things. I would also consider SEO. Like maybe if you have your preferred terms, you would also say formerly known as ESL, like, and then and then when people search for ESL, it'll come up. So like there are a lot of considerations. And this is why I think that conscious language is about creativity and flexibility. So notice how like just going through my thought process, you noticed how flexible and creative I was, depending on the audience, who's involved, just feel it out and explore. Like try this. If somebody writes to you and says, hey, this really bothers me that you use this, you could say, oh, thank you so much for the feedback, and then look up their term and just see. It might just be one person out of millions of people who have this feeling, and that is for you to judge whether in your personal practice, if one person speaking up will get you to change your mind, right? That's our decision to make. For me, that's not enough. Like I would need a more widespread consensus for me to adopt another language for many reasons. Yeah.
I think that I especially like what you say about using formally known as. I think that that's a
Or
good suggestion.
formerly. Oh, I see. Formally is interesting. I said formerly.
Formerly, yeah, that's what I'm, or
Okay.
yeah, used to be known as. That's what
Yeah,
I meant.
yeah. Or sometimes known as,
Sometimes
whatever
known.
the reality is. I'm actually not in this. I'm not immersed in that language, so I don't know.
And so then I have a question from Kristen. This is a question. This is a question regarding conscious writing in fiction. Does your book address who can write a character that is not in their personal experience? For example, a straight person writing a queer person, a white woman writing a person of color, etc. What is the proper procedure to address this issue with a client? When is a sensitivity reader enough, and when is this not someone's story to tell?
I believe that anybody can write about anybody. Um, Whether you should or not is different. And
Mhm.
sometimes if you if you yourself do not have an appropriate context for writing about an identity, because it may further misrepresentation, or it may further stereotypes or negative narratives, or if it may unintentionally demean. Um, if your portrayal not is lacking research, if you have not been, if you're using outdated language, if you are using words associated negatively with those groups. An example is like using thug, which is
Yeah.
associated with like, you know, I want to say black black men and boys, and not women for some reason. So like if you unintentionally use words that are part of like the historical backdrop for this community, then I would say hold off on portraying these communities until you have immersed yourself more in uh, like more accurate ways of depicting them. But ultimately, I think anybody can write about anybody. What often happens with books, especially, is the story of a white author um, writing about a non-white protagonist or community or characters and or culture, and then their book is acquired, but not all these other books that are written by people of that culture. So that is the frustration where like you need to recognize your own power, your
Sure.
own advantages. Like
Yeah.
okay, so there are a lot of this is I'm trying to think if this is relevant. There are a lot of things that I can go for as a writer. Like I could apply for all these residencies and fellowships and competitions, but I don't because I'm like, is there somebody else who needs this more? And I want people to who are writing about a culture that is not their own to think like, is there somebody else who needs to write about? I mean, who should be more visible than I? Like, should I, with my power, I mean, I don't go for these because my CV is like 15 pages long. I don't. I want somebody else to have a chance. I want the spotlight to be on who deserves that spotlight. So like so I don't write about other communities if I think, well, first of all, my perception of this community is second or third hand. Like it's just so just I'm not immersed in this. I did not grow up in this culture. Who else can speak to this culture um, in a firsthand way? Like who has firsthand experience? I'm going to let them do that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there's a book. Oh, okay. I can't find it right now, but a colleague, her book just came out. Her name is Alex Temblador, and she wrote a book
Okay.
called Writing an Identity Not Your Own, or something like that. Can you
Okay.
please look that up? Alex Temblador. Um,
Okay.
and I highly recommend this book. It's somewhere in my office, I swear. I just can't dig through all the piles right now. So yeah, please check it out. I understand that she has a section in there that goes over um, stereotypes. Like I always tell people, how can you avoid stereotypes? Well, you need to know about them first. You can't avoid stereotypes. I mean, unfortunately, and stereotypes, like list by list. I don't cover this in my book, so it's a great complement to the Conscious Style Guide.
Yeah, and I just want to say that that is something that I've kind of realized though, is like sometimes not even realizing that there's um something to be conscious about, I guess. Like,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
And then like I want to tell you kind of a funny story. So like for consciousstyleguide.com, the website that started it all, I commissioned an article from a Jewish writer and editor, a sensitivity reader, to talk about like how she works with, reading for Jewish culture. And in her article, she was talking about like conservative Christians and conservative Jews, and then like she capitalized conservative for Jews, so I lowercased it. And then she in her comments back, she was like, no, that's a thing, like a capital conservative Jew. I didn't know that, right? So like I didn't even know that was something to be aware of. And then because it was said in the same thought as lowercase conservative Christians, I just thought she meant lowercase conservative Jews. So like the more you know, the more you could be aware of, the more you can make a decision. Like you don't always have a singular path just because you know something is potentially offensive or whatever. But it helps you make a decision, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes, like I would say, when do you call your friends a hoe? Like you really choose the right context when you call your friends a hoe, right? You might not call your mom a hoe, but so like all those are clues. And so part of conscious language is forgiveness of other people. So we need more people to agree that forgiveness is the way to go. Because if I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to forgive you for saying that my pronouns are she, her, I mean, okay, fine. It's she, they. Um, but if other people don't show me the same grace, then we're not all equal, right? I'm extending more grace to you than you are to me. We need more people to participate. So hopefully, because I emphasize forgiveness, flexibility, and fairness in my book throughout, hopefully more people will say, okay, I'm going to relax a little bit. I'm
Yeah.
going to, if I do criticize someone, I'm going to think about how I do, because the way you criticize somebody has its impact. And if they're if the way they receive it is, I can't say anything right around this person, I'm going to not be around them, I'm not going to include them, I'm not going to invite them, um, I'm not going to interview people like that, I'm not going to hire people like that. So like there's a cascading effect too when people think that they will be criticized, and that's something else for us to be all aware of. Unfortunately, I mean, sometimes you just want to say, hey, this sucks. But like that is the ripple effect. And we already see this being talked about in the news, where people will not be alone, like men will not be alone with a woman. Really? Because they're afraid of being accused of sexual harassment. There's got to be another way, right? Because now there's this conscious exclusion of a marginalized group because people don't want to be accused. The effects are just tremendous. So that's why I'm presenting conscious language as flexible and
Yeah.
forgivable,
Mhm.
for allies, not for people who deliberately try to harm.
Oh, we are almost out of time here. I am going to get one last question in here from Letitia. I have a question from a humanities perspective. I used to work on 19th century literature, and the writers I'm talking about would use really racist and problematic terms. And these terms have specific meanings, so we can't substitute different terms to talk about these things. Does Karen have advice for writers who want to avoid perpetuating harm while describing these historical violent concepts? If you could answer in 1 minute.
um, Being creative, is there any way to weave in some type of content notice, or to have a content notice before they begin? Or what I really like is, like, depending on what your product is, if it's an article, I like it when they have it right before I'm about to read it. Because sometimes when I read a content notice at the top of an article, I forget. By the time I'm like midway, I'm sorry, I just do.
Because
So
yeah, yeah.
is there a creative way for you to do this? And I understand that even if you have a warning of some type, there's still some harm for the person as they're reading it, even if they don't want to. So that's why in the Conscious Style Guide, I have a section on how to use emotional freedom techniques, AKA tapping, to relieve stress. So like working with language is such an intimate thing, and reading language and using language, that we need a way to deal with the stress and the
Sure.
little
Yep.
mini micro traumas that
Yep.
happen, or big traumas, um, that happen with language. So my answer is basically be creative, and also the reader has a responsibility to take care of themselves.
Themselves. Yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
This
I
has been
really loved your
wonderful.
questions.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more?
I think so.
I'm sorry.
Okay, we do not. All right.
Okay.
Um,
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate support of me and my book.
I'm going to give a bit of wrap up language here as we come to a close. So thank you so much, Kia and Karen, for being here. Karen, we are very appreciative of your willingness to share your thoughts and insights and expertise and book on this topic that interests all of us in the room today and watching the recording. On behalf of the EFA and Editors Canada, thank you both for being here. For the folks in the room, in November, we are going to shift from Q&A format back to our usual book club format, which is just to do a discussion. Our book for November is The Chicago Guide to Communicating Science. Folks in the room, we'd love to have you join us. We are still looking for someone to host the November meeting, so please email me if you would be open to being a host in November. I have put all of the relevant info in the chat, including the link to our newsletter, which is the best way to learn about upcoming events and opportunities to be involved. The book club is just one very small part of all the different things that the academic editing chapter does. If you want to connect with other academic editors outside of chapter events, the best way to do that asynchronously is to join us over on Discord. The Discord is hosted through the Editorial Freelancers Association, but even if you aren't a member of the EFA, you can still join the academic editing chapter by emailing Oliver to ask for the link. His email address is in the chat. Those are my administrative things to say. That just leaves me to say thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your interested and engaged questions. Sorry we weren't able to get to everything. It's just too much to talk about on this topic. I hope to see everyone again in 2 months, and thanks all. Happy Friday. Bye.